For a man who had conquered the world, a simple wager with a friend would unravel everything he thought he knew, leading him to a truth that would shatter his very foundation. Julian Croft was enthroned in his magnificent penthouse, a spire of glass and steel piercing the Verona city sky, a crystal tumbler of aged Scotch resting in his hand. Below him, the city pulsed, with a million tiny lights, each one a life he considered utterly insignificant, a perfect reflection of his worldview. At 43, Julian was the master of his own universe, a billionaire forged in the fires of high finance, the formidable CEO of Croft Industries. He possessed all the trappings of a king, untold wealth, immense power, and undeniable influence. Yet, beneath the armor of his bespoke suits and the sheen of his public persona, there existed a profound arrogance, an unshakable belief in his own superiority, hardened by years of absolute victory. Julian's world was a carefully curated echo chamber, populated by the elite, the self-congratulatory, a society blissfully detached from the grit of ordinary existence. Tonight was another of his legendary cocktail parties, a glittering affair where the city's titans came to play. Vintage champagne flowed like a river, polished laughter bounced off luxurious surfaces, and the air hummed with talk of market takeovers, exotic escapes, and the casual, cruel mockery of those who lived outside their gilded cage. As Julian glided through the throng, a magnet for admiration and deference, his oldest friend and fiercest rival, Leo Corbin, intercepted him near the Grand Obsidian Bar. "Still the same Julian," Leo observed, a sly smirk playing on his lips as he swirled a deep red wine in his glass. "The man with the perfectly orchestrated life." Julian arched a single eyebrow. "Were you expecting anything less?" Leo's chuckle was a low rumble. "Not in the slightest. But tell me, does it ever become tiresome? The same faces, the same parties, the same predictable perfection." Julian savored a sip of his scotch, leaning his weight against the cool stone of the bar. "Tiresome? Hardly. One doesn't change a winning formula." Leo's smirk deepened, a spark of mischief igniting in his eyes. "You're too insulated, Julian. You've constructed an empire, yes, but you've also built fortress walls so high that genuine surprise can no longer breach them. Don't you ever feel the hunger for a real challenge?" Julian's head tilted, his interest piqued, though his guard remained up. "What kind of challenge are you imagining?" Leo moved closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a secret shared between predators. "A true challenge. Something beyond your sphere of influence. Something or someone you can't simply acquire, manipulate, or dominate." A sharp, confident laugh escaped Julian's lips. "Such a thing doesn't exist." "Oh, but I believe it does," Leo countered, straightening his posture. "In fact, I'd be willing to bet on it." The word bet was a siren's call to Julian, a hook that snagged his competitive soul, a weakness Leo knew all too well. Julian's life was a monument to calculated wins, each one cementing his conviction that he was invincible. "What's the wager?" Julian asked, his tone deceptively casual, his mind already calculating odds. Leo gestured with his glass toward the room of designer-clad guests. "We both know your type, Julian. Young, exquisite, refined women who slot perfectly into this world. But what if the challenge was to marry someone who is the absolute antithesis of that?" Julian's eyebrow rose again. "Define antithesis." Leo's smirk blossomed into a full grin. "Someone who shatters your mold. Someone not conventionally beautiful by your rarefied standards. Someone from a world so different from this one, it might as well be another planet. And here's the masterstroke. You must remain married for a full 6 months. No deceptions, no escape clauses." Julian placed his glass on the bar, his mind already alight. He recognized the challenge for what it was, a game, another magnificent opportunity to demonstrate his supremacy. The terms were preposterous, which only made the victory more delicious to contemplate. "And the prize?" Julian inquired. Leo leaned in again, his voice a low hum. "If you win, I will personally inject $50 million into Croft Industries, no questions asked. But if you fail, let's just say your carefully polished reputation as the man who never loses, will be permanently tarnished. A confident smirk returned to Julian's face. "You're on—" The conversation turned to other matters, but the wager remained, a tantalizing promise echoing in Julian's mind. He had always prided himself on his ability to master any game, and this one, for all its novelty, would be no exception. He would find a woman, he would marry her, and he would prove, once and for all, that no matter the odds, Julian Croft always emerged victorious. Over the following week, Julian mobilized his team. His personal assistant, Clara, began a discreet search, compiling a dossier of potential candidates, women who existed in a universe far from Julian's, but who met Leo's specific criteria. Julian perused the profiles with the cool detachment of a CEO reviewing potential acquisitions, each name and face just another variable in his equation for success. Then his eyes landed on her, Lena Reyes. She didn't just stand out. She erupted from the page, a vibrant defiance of his every preference. A 36-year-old social worker with a lush, curvaceous figure, Lena was the founder of a nonprofit organization, the Beacon Initiative, passionately dedicated to empowering overlooked communities. She had zero connections to high society, a complete disinterest in luxury, and a reputation for being fiercely, unbreakably true to her principles. Julian's smirk returned. She was perfect. He orchestrated a meeting, cloaking his true intentions under the pretense of discussing a potential corporate partnership for her nonprofit. When Lena Reyes walked into his office, Julian was immediately captivated by her presence. She moved with a serene confidence, her wild, natural curls framing a face that was both warm and incredibly resolute. Her attire was simple yet professional, a striking contrast to the manufactured perfection he was accustomed to in women. "Mr. Croft," she said, extending a hand, her voice steady, "thank you for this meeting. I admit I was surprised that a man of your stature would notice our work." Her words were polite, yet they carried a subtle, unspoken challenge. Julian smiled, a mask for his burgeoning intrigue. "Ms. Reyes, I believe in backing causes that have a real impact. Your work demanded my attention." The meeting unfolded with Lena eloquently outlining her nonprofit's mission, detailing the constant struggle for funding and resources. Julian feigned deep interest, nodding in all the right places, while his mind was a whirlwind of calculations, plotting the most effective way to present his audacious offer. As the business talk concluded, Julian leaned forward, his entire demeanor shifting, his voice becoming a quiet instrument of command. "Lena, I have a proposal for you. It's an arrangement that could secure your organization with the kind of resources you've only dreamed of." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion in their depths. "What kind of proposal?" Julian's smile was predatory. "Marry me." An absolute silence descended upon the room. Julian meticulously laid out the terms, carefully editing out the existence of the bet. He masterfully framed the marriage as a symbiotic alliance. She would receive the funding and public profile her nonprofit desperately needed, and he claimed it was a strategic move to soften his corporate image. Lena's expression was a mask of unreadability as she absorbed his words. Julian could see the gears turning in her mind. She was sharp, she was cautious, qualities he found both maddeningly frustrating and undeniably compelling. "I will require some time to consider this," she stated at last. Julian nodded, a picture of patience, though he was certain he had already set the hook. He knew people. Everyone had a price, especially when the stakes were this high. As Lena departed from his office, a wave of triumphant satisfaction washed over him. The pieces of his game were moving into place, and soon the match would begin. He had no way of knowing, of course, that the challenge he had accepted with such unshakable confidence was destined to demolish his meticulously crafted world in ways he could never, ever have imagined. Lena Reyes sat at the worn wooden desk in her cramped office, surrounded by mountains of paperwork, grant applications, and spreadsheets filled with bleak numbers. The fluorescent light overhead hummed and flickered, casting a sterile glow on yet another rejection letter from a potential foundation. A familiar knot of frustration tightened in her stomach, but she pushed it down, refusing to let it win. For a decade, she had poured every ounce of her being into the Beacon Initiative, a lifeline that provided shelter, education, and opportunity for the city's most vulnerable. The challenges were immense, the funding perpetually scarce, but her belief in the work was a fire that would not be extinguished. Her phone buzzed, vibrating against a stack of files, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Julian Croft's assistant, Clara, confirming a second meeting. Lena stared at the glowing screen, her brow furrowed in thought. The initial encounter with Julian had been surreal. Men like him, titans of industry, didn't notice grassroots organizations like hers. He was polished, radiating a self-assurance that was, frankly, intimidating. And yet, his proposal, a bizarre cocktail of audacity and allure, had lingered in her mind, refusing to be dismissed. The next day, as Lena arrived at Julian's gleaming corporate headquarters, she felt a profound sense of dislocation. The building's towering glass facade and cold, immaculate lobby were the antithesis of the vibrant, chaotic community center where she spent her life. Despite the feeling of being an intruder, she walked with her head held high, her resolve a shield against the intimidating opulence. Julian welcomed her with the same smooth charm as before, gesturing for her to take a seat in a deep leather chair, facing his expansive desk, his expression impossible to decipher. "Ms. Reyes," he began, his voice like silk, "thank you for returning. I trust you've had an opportunity to consider my offer." Lena met his gaze directly, her posture unwavering. "I have, but I still can't grasp why a man in your position would propose something so unorthodox. A marriage of convenience isn't exactly the kind of help I was anticipating." Julian leaned back, his fingers steepled before him. "Let's be candid, Lena. People in my world, people with my level of wealth and influence, are constantly under a microscope. An alliance like this offers mutual benefits. Your organization desperately needs funding, and I need to demonstrate a commitment to causes that truly matter." Lena tilted her head, her gaze piercing. "So, this is a public relations strategy for you?" "Not solely," Julian replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I am a firm believer in mutually beneficial transactions. This is a business arrangement, Ms. Reyes. Nothing more, nothing less." The word business hung in the air between them, heavy and cold. For Lena, her work was her lifeblood, deeply intertwined with her own history and the struggles she had witnessed. For Julian, it seemed everything was a negotiation, a game of power and leverage. Still, she could not ignore the transformative power his resources would have for her nonprofit. The thought of a sham marriage was repulsive, but the lives of the people she served hung in the balance. After a long, tense silence, she finally spoke. "If I consent to this, there are conditions. My independence is not for sale. I will continue to run my organization as I see fit, without any interference from you, and every single dollar you provide will be funneled directly to the community." Julian's smile broadened, a flash of victory in his eyes. "Agreed. And one more thing," Lena added, leaning forward, her voice firm. "If at any moment I feel this arrangement violates my principles, I will walk away. No sum of money is worth my integrity." Julian's confidence was absolute. "Understood." With a deep, reluctant breath, Lena extended her hand. Julian shook it, his grip firm, sealing their extraordinary pact. As she walked out of his office, a tempest of doubt and determination swirled inside her. She had made a pact that could change countless lives for the better, but it came with a steep, personal price. The wedding was a swift, sterile affair, executed with minimalist precision. Julian ensured that the small ceremony radiated an aura of understated elegance. Lena arrived in a simple cream-colored dress, having firmly refused the team of stylists and designers Julian's assistant had tried to impose on her. She felt utterly alien in the pristine chapel, a stranger surrounded by Julian's polished, smiling acquaintances. The absence of her own friends and family was a deliberate choice. She couldn't bring herself to invent a lie that would explain this bizarre reality. As the officiant declared them husband and wife, Lena glanced at Julian. He looked satisfied, like a man who had just successfully closed a multi-million-dollar deal. A wave of nausea churned in her stomach. The reception was just as impersonal. Julian was in his element, effortlessly mingling with his guests, while Lena sat at a secluded table, a silent observer of the spectacle. She felt like a beautiful, expensive prop in Julian's grand, elaborate play. Despite the profound discomfort, she kept reminding herself of the reason she was there, the funding for the Beacon Initiative. She would not let her personal pride sabotage the future of those who relied on her. Their first night as a married couple established the unspoken rules of their arrangement. Julian led her to the penthouse, a vast, opulent space adorned with modern art, reflective surfaces, and breathtaking floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the glittering Verona city skyline. It was a universe away from the cozy, lived-in apartment she called home. "This is your home now," Julian stated, his tone cool and formal. "I trust you'll find everything to your liking." Lena's gaze swept across the cavernous space, her expression carefully neutral. "It's impressive," Julian smirked. "You'll grow accustomed to it." But Lena had no intention of growing accustomed to any of it. She unpacked her few belongings in the guest suite, a clear, unspoken declaration to Julian that she intended to share a title with him, and nothing more. He raised an eyebrow at her choice, but said nothing, retreating to his own wing of the penthouse without another word. In the weeks that followed, their strange dynamic solidified. Julian, true to his word, funneled a substantial amount of money into the Beacon Initiative, enabling Lena to expand her programs and bring on more staff. Yet, despite these material gains, a palpable tension simmered beneath the surface of their daily lives. Julian, a man used to being the gravitational center of any room, found Lena's profound indifference to him both bewildering and infuriating. She consistently declined his invitations to high society functions, choosing instead to pour her energy into her work. Lena, for her part, defended her boundaries with an unyielding resolve. She saw right through his transparent attempts to win her over with extravagant gifts and grand gestures. When he tried to present her with a stunning diamond necklace, she politely refused, saying, "I would much rather see the cost of this go towards a new playground for the community center." Julian's frustration mounted, but he concealed it behind his customary mask of cool confidence. He believed it was only a matter of time that her resolve would eventually erode and she would assimilate into his world. What he failed to grasp was that Lena Reyes wasn't playing his game. Her strength, her unshakable sense of self, was a new kind of challenge, one he hadn't prepared for. As the days bled into weeks, the first cracks began to appear in Julian's carefully constructed facade. For the first time in his life, he was confronted with someone he could not control, and the experience both fascinated and deeply unnerved him. What had started as a simple, arrogant game was rapidly evolving into something far more complex than he had ever bargained for. The gleaming black car glided into the heart of the city's most forgotten neighborhood, a world away from Julian Croft's polished reality. He sat in the plush leather back seat, gazing through the tinted window at a landscape of crumbling facades, vibrant graffiti blooming on weathered brick, and uneven sidewalks teeming with life, children playing, neighbors chatting, a hollow-eyed man slumped against a lamppost. The scene felt utterly foreign, like a documentary he would have switched off after a few minutes of detached observation. Lena had invited him, insisted, that he join her for a community event at the Beacon Initiative. For her, it was an opportunity to show him the work that was her life's purpose. For Julian, it was a tedious obligation, another box to be checked in the performance of their strange arrangement. The car purred to a stop before a converted warehouse, a building that was once a derelict eyesore, but now stood as a vibrant hub of community life. A brilliant mural pulsed with color, a bold statement against the gray, monotonous backdrop of the surrounding streets. Lena was already there, a whirlwind of focused energy in jeans and a Navy Beacon Initiative t-shirt, directing volunteers with a calm, unwavering authority. She moved with a sense of purpose that was almost tangible, pausing to embrace a family, comfort a small child, and organize a mountain of donations. Her energy was a magnetic force, and despite himself, Julian found his eyes drawn to her, a flicker of curiosity warring with his unease. As he stepped out of the climate-controlled sanctuary of the car, the reality of his otherness struck him with full force. His impeccably tailored suit and gleaming Italian loafers were a glaring announcement, "I do not belong here." Heads turned in his direction, some with simple curiosity, others with a thinly veiled disdain. The knot of discomfort in his chest tightened, but he squared his shoulders, determined to project an aura of control. Lena greeted him with a curt nod. "Glad you could make it," she said, her tone professional, a deliberate wall between them. "Let's begin with the food pantry." She led him inside into a large room where long tables were piled high with donated food. Canned goods, fresh vegetables, sacks of rice. A team of volunteers worked with practiced efficiency, distributing supplies to families who looked weary and worn down, but profoundly grateful. Lena explained the operation as they walked, her voice steady and direct. "This is one of our cornerstone programs. We provide essential groceries to over 200 families each week. Most are struggling with job loss, low wages, or crippling medical bills. Without this pantry, some of them simply wouldn't eat." Julian nodded politely, his mind automatically contrasting this reality with the millions of dollars that flowed effortlessly through his company's accounts each day. To his way of thinking, 200 families seemed like a statistically insignificant number. He almost voiced this thought, but caught himself just in time, realizing how utterly tone-deaf and arrogant it would sound in this place. They moved on to the after-school tutoring area, a cheerful space where children sat at small tables with volunteer mentors, their brows furrowed in concentration. The walls were covered with colorful artwork and posters, a stark and hopeful contrast to the harsh world just outside the doors. Lena knelt beside a table, her voice soft as she helped a young boy who was wrestling with a math problem. Julian watched from a distance, feeling more and more like an intruder, an observer in a world whose language he didn't understand. "Why do you do this?" he asked when she rejoined him, the question escaping before he could censor it. "I mean, you've obviously dedicated your entire life to this place, but why?" She looked at him, her expression a careful blank. "Because someone has to," she said, her voice clear and simple. "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible, to struggle, and wonder if anyone in the world even sees you. And because I can't stand by and do nothing when I know I can make a difference." Her words landed with a quiet, unsettling force. They unsettled him not because he disagreed, but because they illuminated a truth he had spent his entire life actively avoiding. He had never genuinely cared about anyone outside of his meticulously curated social and professional circles. His universe was built on profit margins and power plays. The concept of selfless dedication was as alien to him as this neighborhood. The day wore on, with Lena guiding him through every facet of the center's operations. He met single mothers battling to rebuild their lives, teenagers clinging to the hope of a better future, and elderly residents who were simply grateful for a place to feel safe and seen. Each story, each interaction, chipped away at his armor of arrogance, leaving him with a raw, growing sense of unease. He was accustomed to being the most powerful man in any room, the one to whom everyone deferred. But here, in this place, his wealth and his status were utterly meaningless. By the time they were back in the car, heading towards his world, Julian was uncharacteristically silent. Lena didn't probe, and the quiet between them was thick with unspoken thoughts. As the car sped away, Julian stared out the window, his mind a maelstrom of new, uncomfortable feelings. For the first time in a very long time, he felt a profound uncertainty about himself, about the choices he had made, and about the vast, complex world that existed beyond his ivory tower. That evening, back in the silent opulence of the penthouse, Julian poured himself a drink and stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city glitter below. Normally, this view filled him with a surge of pride, a confirmation of his own power and success. Tonight, it just felt empty. The faces from the community center lingered in his mind. The exhausted mother with a toddler on her hip, the elderly man whose hands trembled as he accepted a bag of groceries, the teenage girl who dreamed of being a doctor, These were people he would have dismissed as statistics just weeks ago. Now he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he had been missing something essential, something fundamentally real. Lena arrived home an hour later, carrying a box of leftover supplies from the center. She walked past him without a word, heading straight to the kitchen to unload its contents. He watched her from the living room, a strange paralysis, keeping him silent, unsure of what to say. Finally, he set down his glass and spoke, his voice quiet in the vast room. Today, it was different. Lena glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "Is that your way of saying it made you uncomfortable?" Julian paused, then gave a slight nod. "Perhaps. It's not the kind of world I'm familiar with." "That's obvious," she said, her tone sharp but not cruel. "But maybe that's the point. You've spent your whole life inside a bubble, Julian. You have no concept of what it's like to struggle, to worry about things like rent or putting food on the table." Her words were a direct hit, and though his pride stung, he couldn't deny their truth. He wanted to argue, to defend his success and the sacrifices he'd made, but for some reason the words wouldn't come. Instead, he did something that surprised even himself. He nodded. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't understand, but I would like to." Lena looked at him for a long, searching moment, and for the first time her expression seemed to soften just a fraction. "We'll see," she said, turning back to her task. "Actions speak louder than words, Julian." He remained silent, her words echoing in the quiet space. He had always viewed life as a series of challenges to be conquered, games to be won. But this wasn't a game. And for the first time, he wasn't even sure what winning looked like. As the night deepened, Julian found himself thinking less about his wager with Leo and more about the woman who had, without any intention, turned his world on its axis. Lena was unlike anyone he had ever encountered, strong, principled, and deeply, fiercely compassionate. She was challenging him in ways he didn't even know he needed to be challenged. And though he would never admit it, a part of him desperately wanted to rise and meet that challenge. For the first time in his life, Julian Croft wasn't entirely sure who he was, and the uncertainty was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. Julian Croft had always wielded control as his ultimate weapon. It was the bedrock of his empire and his identity. Every action, every decision was a calculated move designed to maintain his absolute authority over his life and everyone in it. Yet Lena Reyes seemed to operate on a different plane. Immune to his influence, and her unyielding independence was beginning to fray the edges of his legendary patience. The day at the community center had left him deeply unsettled, and rather than exploring the source of his discomfort, he defaulted to his lifelong strategy. When faced with uncertainty, assert dominance. The morning after their visit, Julian strode into the kitchen, already clad in an immaculate suit, his armor of confidence seemingly restored. Lena was at the island sipping coffee, her focus completely absorbed by a report on her laptop. She didn't acknowledge his entrance. "You know," Julian began, his tone light as he poured himself a coffee, "if you dedicated a little less time to those spreadsheets and a bit more to attending events with me, you might actually start to enjoy yourself." Lena's eyes flickered up from the screen for a brief moment, her expression unreadable. "Enjoy myself? At one of your society galas, where people feign interest in causes they can't possibly comprehend?" "No, thank you." A muscle in Julian's jaw tightened. "Those galas raise millions of dollars. They are effective." "For the egos of the organizers, perhaps," Lena retorted, setting down her mug. "But they rarely create a lasting difference for the people who truly need it. Real change isn't born from champagne toasts and hollow speeches." Her words were a direct assault on the very foundations of his world. Julian had built his legacy on the principle that perception was reality, that appearances mattered above all else. He prided himself on his ability to charm and influence. Yet here was a woman who saw right through his performance. He pivoted to a new tactic. "I have a charity function tonight," he said, his voice smooth and persuasive. "It would mean a great deal to me if you would join." Lena's expression remained firm. "And by mean a great deal, you're saying it would be beneficial for your public image." The comment stung, but Julian masked it with a smirk. "Call it whatever you wish. It's still a valuable opportunity for you to network. I have no interest in networking with people who have no interest in understanding my work, Lena stated flatly. But I appreciate the offer. Her definitive refusal left Julian simmering. He had operated under the assumption that the sheer force of his wealth and influence would eventually wear her down. But Lena was proving to be a far more formidable opponent than he had ever imagined. That evening, Julian attended the gala alone. It was a glittering spectacle held in a grand ballroom, a sea of Manhattan's most powerful and privileged, all dressed in their finest. The air was thick with talk of stock options, art auctions, and philanthropic donations that were, in reality, clever tax strategies. Julian moved through the room with his usual effortless grace, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about Lena, about her sharp, incisive words, her quiet, unshakable strength, and the way she had so easily dismissed everything he held dear. For the first time in years, a strange, unfamiliar pang of self-doubt pricked at him. Could she be right? Was his philanthropy nothing more than a series of performative gestures? The thought was so unsettling that he quickly drowned it in another glass of champagne. The next day, Julian resolved to take a more aggressive tack. If Lena would not willingly adapt to his world, he would find a way to impose his world on her. He began scheduling meetings and events that demanded her presence, framing them as essential for the public profile of the Beacon Initiative. Lena reluctantly attended a few, but her patience for the superficiality quickly wore thin. At one such event, a luncheon hosted by one of Julian's business associates, Lena found herself trapped between two women who were far more interested in society gossip than in meaningful dialogue. One of them leaned in close, her diamond earrings flashing. "So, Lena," she purred, her smile saccharine, "tell us, how did you and Julian meet? It must have been such a whirlwind romance." Lena forced a polite smile. "We were introduced through mutual acquaintances." "Ah, of course," the woman replied, clearly hoping for more salacious details. "And your work? What is it that you do, again?" "I run a non-profit organization," Lena said, her tone steady but firm. "We provide resources and support for underserved communities." The woman's smile faltered, her interest visibly evaporating. "How noble," she said dismissively, immediately turning her attention to the person on her other side. Lena bit back a sharp retort, her frustration simmering just below the surface. She glanced across the table at Julian, who was deep in conversation, seemingly oblivious to her discomfort. Later, as they rode home in a heavy silence, Lena finally spoke. "This isn't working." Julian looked at her, his expression a careful blank. "What isn't?" "This," she said, gesturing between them. "You, dragging me to these events where no one has any genuine interest in what I do or who I am. It's a waste of my time, and it's a waste of yours." Julian frowned. "Those events are opportunities, Lena. You could secure significant funding for your programs if you would just learn to play the game." Lena shook her head, her patience finally snapping. "You still don't see it, do you? I'm not interested in playing your games or pandering to people who only care about their own reflection. My work is about real people and real problems, not about impressing your friends." Her words pierced through his defenses, but instead of conceding the point, he doubled down. "Sometimes, Lena, you have to compromise. That's how the world actually works. Maybe in your world," she shot back, her voice sharp. "But I am not like you, Julian. I don't compromise my values for the sake of a convenience." The car fell silent once more, the tension between them a palpable, suffocating force. Over the next few weeks, their conflicts intensified. Julian's attempts to control Lena grew more blatant, and her resistance became more resolute. He began to second-guess her decisions, subtly undermining her authority at the Beacon Initiative by suggesting alternative ways to use the funds he provided. Lena pushed back at every turn, refusing to cede control of her life's work. One evening, their simmering conflict finally boiled over. "You think you're so righteous," Julian snapped, his voice laced with frustration. "But let's be honest, without my money, your precious non-profit wouldn't even exist." Lena's eyes narrowed, her voice low and dangerous. "You're right. Your money has helped, but don't you dare think for one second that it gives you the right to control me or what I do. I built this organization from nothing without your help, and I will continue to fight for it with or without you." Her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. For a fleeting moment, he saw her not as a problem to be solved or a challenge to be conquered, but as a person who had fought and survived battles he couldn't even imagine. The realization was deeply uncomfortable, and he didn't know how to process it. So he did what he always did. He turned away, retreating to his study. As he poured another drink, he couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that he was losing. Not just the bet, but something far more important. For the first time in his life, Julian Croft was in a fight he wasn't sure he could win. The days following their explosive confrontation were shrouded in a cold, heavy silence. Lena immersed herself completely in her work at the Beacon Initiative, a sanctuary where she could pour her frustration into positive action, avoiding Julian at all costs. Julian, in turn, retreated to the sterile comfort of his office, burying himself in complex deals and financial forecasts. Both were too proud, too stubborn to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. But the tension was a constant, unspoken presence in the vast penthouse. Julian found himself unable to shake Lena's parting words. "I will continue to fight for it, with or without you." Her defiance, her absolute refusal to be cowed by his power or his money, was infuriating. And yet it stirred something else within him, something deeper. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who bent to his will. Lena was unbendable, and that made her utterly impossible to ignore. One evening, driven by a strange compulsion, Julian found himself navigating to the Beacon Initiative's social media page. He had never bothered to take a genuine interest in the organization before, but now a powerful curiosity compelled him to understand. He watched videos of Lena speaking at community gatherings, her voice filled with a passion and conviction that was mesmerizing as she advocated for the people she served. He read the testimonials, the stories from individuals whose lives had been fundamentally changed by her work. A single mother who had found safe, stable housing. A young man who had earned a college scholarship through the center's tutoring program. An elderly woman who wrote that the center had made her feel seen for the first time in years. The stories were raw and humbling, and they ignited a profound sense of inadequacy within him. For the very first time, he began to question the true value of his own life's achievements. His billions had bought him power, prestige, and every imaginable luxury. But what had he ever really done to make a genuine difference in the world? The next morning, Julian made a decision. Instead of waiting for Lena to return late at night, he would go to her. He drove to the community center and arrived unannounced, stepping out of his world and into hers. He walked into the bustling building with its mismatched furniture and the faint smell of paint and cleaning supplies. The air vibrated with a chaotic, hopeful energy. Volunteers sorting donations, children laughing in a play corner, a group of seniors animatedly discussing plans for a community garden. Julian felt like an outsider, but for once he pushed the discomfort away. He saw Lena across the room, her attention focused on a young woman who looked barely out of her teens, holding a sleeping toddler. The girl's face was a mixture of exhaustion and profound relief as Lena handed her a brochure and a package of diapers. Lena looked up and froze when she saw him standing there. Her expression was a mask, but her tone was sharp as she walked over to him. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her arms crossed defensively. "I wanted to see it for myself," Julian said simply. "I wanted to understand what you do." Lena raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And why the sudden curiosity? Are you trying to prove a point?" Julian hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I came because I've realized I've been wrong. About a lot of things. I came here to learn." Her skepticism remained, but she didn't send him away. Instead, she handed him a clipboard. "If you're serious, you can start by helping. We're taking inventory for the food pantry." Julian took the clipboard without a word of protest and followed her instructions. For the next several hours, he worked shoulder to shoulder with the other volunteers, organizing crates of canned goods and packing bags for families in need. The work was tedious and repetitive, but it offered him a new and humbling perspective. He listened as the volunteers shared their stories, their struggles, and their dreams. He learned that many of them had once been recipients of the center's services and were now giving back. Lena observed him from a distance, noting how completely out of his element he was. Yet, to her surprise, he didn't complain or try to take charge. He worked quietly, listening far more than he spoke. By the end of the day, his suit jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves were rolled up, his expensive tie was loosened, and his perfectly polished veneer had been stripped away. For the first time, he looked less like a billionaire and more like an ordinary man trying to do something meaningful. That evening, as they were locking up the center, Julian approached Lena. She was tidying a table of brochures, her exhaustion visible, but her focus absolute. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Lena looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For letting me see this," Julian said. "For giving me a chance to understand." Her expression softened, but she kept her guard firmly in place. "Understanding is one thing, Julian, but this isn't a one-day photo opportunity. These people need consistency, not grand, empty gestures." "I know," he said, his gaze unwavering, "and I want to help, not just with my checkbook, with my time, my connections, whatever I can do to support what you're building here." Lena studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. For the first time, she saw something different in his eyes, something that looked like genuine remorse. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a beginning. "We'll see," she said finally. "Actions speak louder than words." Over the next few weeks, Julian made good on his promise. He began to spend more and more time at the Beacon Initiative, not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a dedicated volunteer. He attended planning meetings, helped organize events, and even participated in a fundraising drive. Slowly, cautiously, he began to earn the trust of the staff and volunteers, though many remained wary of his ultimate motives. For Lena, witnessing Julian's transformation was both gratifying and deeply confusing. She had fully expected him to lose interest after a few days, but he persisted. He was no longer the arrogant, dismissive billionaire who had seen her work as insignificant. He was truly trying to understand a world that had once been invisible to him. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the food pantry, Julian finally spoke the words that had been building inside him. "You were right," he said quietly, not looking at her. "About everything. I've spent my whole life chasing things that don't matter, believing they would make me happy. But they haven't." Lena paused, a can of soup halfway to a bag. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "What changed?" she asked. "You did," Julian admitted, finally meeting her eyes. "You showed me a different way to live, a way I had never even considered. And now I can't stop thinking about it." Lena didn't reply immediately. She had seen flashes of this new Julian before, but this felt raw, unforced. Still, she couldn't forget the lie that had brought them together, the truth he was still withholding. "I'm glad you're beginning to see things differently," she said at last. "But change takes time. And trust takes even longer." Julian nodded, accepting her words without argument. For the first time, he wasn't looking for a quick win or an easy path to success. He was willing to put in the work, to prove himself, not just to Lena, but to the man he was slowly, painfully, hoping to become. As they finished packing the last of the food bags, a quiet, unspoken understanding passed between them. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was a step, and for Julian, that was more than enough. The weeks following Julian's decision to immerse himself in the Beacon Initiative marked the beginning of a profound and unlikely transformation. What had started as a calculated effort to prove a point to Lena had evolved into something much deeper, something Julian himself was only beginning to comprehend. He found himself drawn to the work, not for any potential validation, but because it felt fundamentally real in a way his vast corporate empire never had. Each day at the community center was a lesson in humility. Julian met single mothers juggling multiple jobs to keep their families afloat, teenagers desperate for a second chance after a mistake, and elderly residents fighting to maintain their dignity in the face of poverty and neglect. Their stories were raw, unfiltered, and inescapably human. For the first time in his life, Julian felt the immense weight of his own privilege, and the profound emptiness of the world he had so carefully constructed. The transformation was far from seamless. Julian's presence at the center was initially met with deep skepticism, and in some cases, outright hostility. Many of the volunteers viewed him as a billionaire interloper, playing at charity for his own selfish reasons. It was a sentiment Julian couldn't entirely deny. After all, his involvement had been born from a cynical game he no longer wished to play. During one volunteer meeting, Julian, reverting to his old habits, presented a top-down idea for expanding the center's programs. He suggested leveraging his corporate network to bring in major funding and resources. A sudden silence fell over the room as all eyes turned to Lena. She stood, her expression unreadable, and addressed the group. "Julian's connections could certainly help us reach more people," she said carefully. "But we must always remember to stay true to our mission. This work is not about impressing wealthy donors or chasing big numbers. It's about creating real sustainable change, and that always starts by listening to the needs of the community." Her words were a gentle but firm rebuke, and Julian felt the sting. He nodded in agreement, understanding that his approach had to change. This was not his world to command. He couldn't treat it like another hostile takeover. Despite the initial friction, Julian persisted. He began spending every spare hour at the center, doing whatever was needed, from organizing fundraising events to scrubbing floors. The volunteers, who had been so wary, began to see a different side of him. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, and more importantly, he was willing to listen and to admit when he didn't have the answers. Lena noticed the changes too. The arrogant, detached man she had married out of necessity was slowly being replaced by someone else. He listened more than he spoke. He asked questions instead of issuing commands, and he seemed genuinely invested in the success of their work. Yet a shadow remained. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something unspoken, a critical piece of the puzzle missing between them. One evening, after a grueling day at the center, Julian and Lena found themselves alone in the office. The volunteers had all gone home, and a quiet hum from the air conditioner was the only sound. Julian was reviewing a stack of grant applications, his tie loosened, and his sleeves rolled up. Lena sat across from him, sorting through donation receipts. "I've been thinking," Julian said suddenly, his voice breaking the comfortable silence, "about the way I've lived my life up until now." Lena looked up, surprised by the raw vulnerability in his tone. "What about it?" "I've wasted so much time chasing things that don't matter," he admitted, his voice low. "Money, power, status. I thought those things were the definition of success. But they're not. They haven't made me happy." Lena's expression softened, but she waited, letting him speak. She had seen glimpses of this introspection before, but this felt different, more sincere. "What do you want now?" she asked quietly. Julian paused, then looked directly at her, his eyes filled with a clarity that startled even him. "I want to do something that matters. I want to be someone who makes a real difference." Lena studied him for a long, silent moment, searching for any hint of artifice. She found none. Finally, she nodded. "Then start by showing up every single day, no matter how difficult it gets. That's the only way to earn trust around here." Julian took her words to heart. In the weeks that followed, he became an indispensable part of the center's team. He worked tirelessly, driven not by a need for recognition, but by a deep desire to prove to Lena, to the volunteers, and most of all, to himself, that he was capable of genuine change. Simultaneously, Julian began to implement changes in his corporate life. He started questioning the long-standing practices of Croft Industries, particularly those that prioritized profit above people. He pushed for new policies promoting fair wages, ethical sourcing, and community investment. His board of directors met his proposals with fierce resistance, but Julian was relentless. As Julian's personal and professional transformation gained momentum, his old friends from high society began to take notice. Leo Corbin, the very man who had set this entire chain of events in motion, invited Julian to lunch. "I have to admit," Leo said, a smirk playing on his lips as they sat in a private room at an exclusive club, "you've surprised me." "I never thought you'd last this long," Julian frowned. What do you mean? This whole charity act, Leo said, waving his hand dismissively. It's an impressive performance, but it's not you. You're a businessman, Julian, not a social worker. Julian's jaw tightened. People can change, Leo. Perhaps, Leo conceded, leaning back in his chair. But don't forget why you started all of this. A bet is a bet, after all. The reminder struck Julian like a physical blow. In the whirlwind of his transformation, he had almost managed to forget about the bet, or at least he had wanted to. His relationship with Lena, which had begun as a cynical game, had become something real, something complicated and important. And now the full weight of his initial deception threatened to crush everything. Back at the penthouse that evening, Julian sat alone in the vast living room, nursing a glass of scotch. He thought of Lena, her strength, her passion, the way she had forced him to confront his own deep-seated flaws. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he couldn't continue to lie to her. If he truly wanted to change, if he truly wanted to build something real, he had to start with the truth. When Lena walked in, weary from another long day, Julian stood to meet her. "Lena," he began, his voice unsteady, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked at him, her expression tired but patient. "What is it?" Julian hesitated, the weight of his confession pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He had spent his entire life avoiding vulnerability, but now he had no other choice. If he was ever going to earn Lena's trust, he had to start by telling her the truth, no matter how devastating the consequences. Julian stood in the dimly lit living room, the city's glittering lights forming a cold, impersonal backdrop behind him. The scotch in his hand trembled as he faced Lena, who had stopped in the middle of the room, her bag still clutched in her hand. Her expression was calm but wary, her eyes narrowing as she registered his profound unease. "I haven't been honest with you," Julian began, his voice low and strained, "about why I approached you. About the real reason for this marriage." Lena placed her bag on the counter, her movements deliberate as she folded her arms across her chest. Her face was an unreadable mask, but Julian could feel the atmosphere in the room thicken with a sudden, sharp tension. "Go on," she said, her tone perfectly level. Julian took a deep, shuddering breath. "When I first proposed this arrangement, it wasn't because I cared about your work. It wasn't even because I believed in what you do. It was part of a bet." The words hung between them, heavy and lethal. Lena's posture went rigid, her arms falling to her sides as her eyes bored into him, wide with disbelief and dawning horror. "A bet?" she repeated, her voice a sharp crack in the silence. "You married me as part of a bet?" Julian could only nod, a tidal wave of guilt washing over him. "Yes, it started as a dare, a game. Leo Corbin. He challenged me to marry someone who was the complete opposite of my world, to prove that I could adapt to any situation and still come out on top." The word win tasted like ash in his mouth, its hollowness exposed by the reality of what he was about to lose. "And I was just a pawn in this game?" Lena's voice was quieter now, but it held a new, chilling edge. "A piece on your personal chessboard?" "No," Julian said quickly, taking a step toward her. "Not anymore. I know how this sounds, and I know I was wrong. So incredibly wrong. But things changed. You changed me. This may have started as a bet, but it became so much more. I care about you, Lena. I care about the work you've built, and I care about the people you fight for every single day." Lena held up a hand, a sharp gesture that stopped him in his tracks. "So tell me, Julian, at what point exactly did it stop being a game for you? Was it after the wedding? After you realized you couldn't control me? Or was it after you discovered that your money meant nothing to me?" Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Any answer he could give would sound like a pathetic, self-serving excuse. Lena shook her head, her voice rising with a tide of righteous anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just lie to me. You used me. You took something as personal as marriage, something I only agreed to because I believed it could help my community. And you twisted it into a cheap, arrogant stunt." "I know," Julian said, his own voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve for you to forgive me. But I had to tell you the truth. I couldn't keep lying to you." Lena stared at him, her jaw tight with fury and betrayal. "You think telling me the truth now makes any difference? It doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't change the fact that you played with my life, that you violated the trust I gave you." Her words were like daggers, each one striking deeper than the last. Julian felt the full, crushing weight of his actions in a way he never had before. He had spent his life evading responsibility, hiding behind his wealth and power. But now there was nowhere left to hide. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "But I wanted you to know the truth." "You deserve at least that much." Lena exhaled, a sharp, ragged sound. "The truth?" "The truth is that this was never about me. It was always about you, your ego, your desperate need to prove something to yourself and your friends. And now that you've shattered what little trust we built, you think you can fix it with a simple apology?" Julian's heart plummeted. He had hoped, foolishly, for a different reaction, even though he knew he deserved this. "Lena, please." "No," she interrupted, her voice firm and final. "I don't want to hear any more. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Julian. And without trust, there is nothing." With that, she turned, grabbed her bag from the counter, and walked toward the door. Julian followed, his chest tight with a desperate panic. "Lena, wait," he called after her. "Please, just give me a chance to prove to you that I've changed." She stopped at the door and turned back to face him, her expression resolute, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Change isn't enough, Julian. Not when it's built on the foundation of someone else's humiliation." The door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing in the vast, silent penthouse. Julian stood frozen, staring at the closed door as if he could will her to reappear. But he knew, in the deepest, most broken part of his soul, that she was gone. The days that followed were the emptiest of Julian's entire life. Without Lena's presence, the magnificent penthouse felt like a cold, cavernous tomb, its luxury a mockery of his inner desolation. He tried to lose himself in his work, but the deals and projects that had once fueled his ambition now felt hollow and utterly meaningless. At the Beacon Initiative, Lena continued her work with a fierce, unwavering determination. She refused to allow Julian's betrayal to derail her mission, yet even as she poured every ounce of her energy into the community, the weight of his confession was a constant, heavy presence. She couldn't deny that he had changed, that his actions over the past few months had felt genuine. But their entire relationship had been built on a lie, a wound that couldn't be easily healed. Meanwhile, Julian began the arduous process of atonement. He donated millions more to the Beacon Initiative, not as a calculated move to win back Lena's affection, but because he truly, deeply believed in the work she was doing. He also doubled down on reforming his business practices, implementing sweeping new policies that prioritized ethics and community impact over profit. These changes earned him both praise and scorn from his peers, but for the first time, Julian didn't care about their approval. He wasn't living for them anymore. Still, none of it felt like enough. He was haunted by the memory of Lena's face in that final moment, the raw pain in her eyes as she realized the depth of his deception. He wanted, more than anything, to make things right, but he didn't know how, or if it was even possible. One evening, as Julian sat alone in the silent penthouse, his phone chimed with a notification. It was an email from one of the volunteers at the Beacon Initiative, thanking him for his recent contributions and sharing a photo of the new community center they had been able to open with his funding. The photo showed Lena standing proudly in front of the new building, surrounded by smiling children and volunteers. She looked tired, but she was radiant, her smile wide and genuine. Julian stared at the image for a long time, a painful lump forming in his throat. He realized then that his journey wasn't about earning Lena's forgiveness or winning her back. It was about becoming the kind of man who could look at his own reflection without shame. If there was ever a chance of rebuilding what they had lost, it had to start with him, not with his money, not with his connections, but with the person he was striving to become. And for the first time, Julian understood that redemption wasn't a destination he could arrive at. It was a long, difficult path, and he was finally ready to walk it. Months passed, each one a quiet testament to a shared, unspoken determination. For Julian, life had become a relentless, solitary pursuit of redemption. He no longer found validation in his wealth or his social standing. He sought it in the small, consistent actions he took to repair the world he had once so casually damaged. His once perfect universe of power and prestige now felt like a hollow shell, and the tangible, meaningful work he supported through the Beacon Initiative became his anchor, a daily reminder that true change was possible, even for a man like him. Lena, meanwhile, had poured her heart into her work. With the new funding, she had dramatically expanded the Beacon Initiative's reach, opening new centers and launching ambitious programs for job training and affordable housing. She made it clear to her team that while Julian's donations had been a catalyst, their mission would never again be dependent on the whims of a single wealthy individual. Her resolve was like steel, but in the quiet, lonely hours of the night, when the city outside was hushed, she found her thoughts drifting to Julian. Not the arrogant man who had used her in a bet, but the man he was becoming, the one who had shown such surprising glimpses of humility, empathy, and something that felt dangerously close to love. One crisp autumn evening, Lena stood on the steps of the newest Beacon Initiative Center, watching as families from the community streamed inside for the grand opening celebration. The building was a beacon of hope, a testament to years of tireless work, a vibrant splash of color in a neighborhood that had been overlooked for far too long. She greeted volunteers and guests, her smile warm and genuine, though her eyes betrayed a deep-seated exhaustion. Then, amidst the joyful chaos of the crowd, a familiar figure caught her eye. Julian was standing near the entrance, dressed not in his usual armor of a tailored suit, but simply in jeans and a sweater. He looked nervous, clutching a small envelope in his hands as he scanned the room. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and for a heart-stopping moment, the noise and motion of the celebration seemed to fade into a dull roar. Lena hesitated, her heart beginning to pound a frantic, unwelcome rhythm against her ribs, before she slowly made her way over to him. "Julian," she said, her tone cautious, guarded. "What are you doing here?" He offered her a small, tentative smile. "I heard about the opening. I wanted to see it for myself." She studied him for a moment, noticing the subtle but profound changes in his demeanor. He seemed quieter, more grounded, as if the difficult months apart had stripped away the final layers of the arrogance that had once defined him. "It's a big night," she said, gesturing toward the bustling center. "A lot of people worked very hard to make this happen." "You should be proud, Lena," Julian said, his voice filled with a sincerity that was unmistakable. "This is incredible." Her expression softened, just a fraction, but she kept her defenses firmly in place. "Thank you. But this isn't about me. It's about them. The community." "I know," Julian said. He held out the envelope. "I wanted to give you this. It's a personal donation, separate from anything the company has done. No strings attached." Lena took the envelope, but didn't open it. Instead, she looked up, meeting his gaze. "You didn't have to come here to do this." "I didn't come just for that," Julian admitted, his voice quiet. "I came because I wanted to see you." Lena's heart constricted, but she didn't let it show on her face. "Why?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability that broke through his composed exterior. "Because I needed to tell you again that I am sorry. Not just for the bet, for everything. For the way I dismissed you, for the way I tried to control you, for not seeing you for who you truly are from the very beginning." Lena didn't respond right away. She held his gaze, searching for any sign of the old, manipulative Julian, but she found none. For the first time, his words felt completely unguarded, free from the calculated charm he had once used as a weapon. "I don't know if I can trust you, Julian," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Not yet?" "I understand," he said, his tone steady and accepting. "I don't expect you to. I'm not here to win you back. I wanted you to know that I see you now. Truly. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your respect." The evening continued, but Julian kept a respectful distance, watching from the periphery as Lena moved through the crowd, a beacon of grace and purpose. He didn't push her, didn't try to talk to her further. When the event began to wind down, he slipped out as quietly as he had arrived, leaving her with the envelope and his words hanging in the air. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Lena opened the envelope. Inside, she found a letter handwritten in Julian's precise, elegant script. It wasn't long, but it carried the immense weight of everything he had been unable to say in person. Lena, I spent my life building walls, thinking they made me strong. You showed me that real strength comes from having the courage to tear them down. You challenged me in ways no one ever has, and for that I will be eternally grateful. I don't know if I will ever earn your forgiveness, but I will never stop trying. Because you and the work that you do have changed me in ways I never thought possible. Yours, Julian. Lena read the letter twice, her emotions a tangled, painful knot of anger, sadness, and something else, something she couldn't yet name. She wasn't ready to forgive him, not completely. But for the first time, she began to wonder if there might be a path forward. Over the following weeks, Julian continued to support the Beacon Initiative from a distance, respecting Lena's boundaries while remaining steadfast in his commitment. Slowly, she began to see the true depth of his transformation, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, unwavering consistency of his actions. One afternoon, as they found themselves working side by side at a food drive, Lena finally broke the silence between them. You've changed, Julian. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. I had to. I see that, she said, her tone softening. But change isn't enough on its own. It has to last. It will, Julian said with a quiet certainty. Because this isn't about you anymore, Lena. It's about becoming the kind of man I can live with. And for the first time, I think I'm getting there. Lena nodded, a small, hopeful smile touching her lips. We'll see. Months later, they stood together at another Beacon Initiative event, this time not as adversaries, not as part of a contract, but as partners. Their journey had been messy, painful, and fraught with uncertainty, but it had led them to a place of mutual respect and quiet understanding. As the sun set over the city, casting a warm golden glow, Julian turned to Lena. Thank you, he said softly. For what? She asked. For giving me a second chance, he said. For showing me that it's never too late to start over. Lena smiled, and this time, the warmth in her eyes finally truly reached him. Just don't waste it, Julian. I won't, he promised. And for the first time, they stood not as strangers bound by a lie, but as two people ready to build something real together.